I'm finally able to do this video. I had recorded this before and the file got completely messed up, but here I am. There are so many books that I read in October and November that I never talked about, so I'm finally going to talk about it, but I have to split it in two parts because of the fact that when I initially wanted to record this and put it out, I hadn't read several books that now I want to talk about. Here's part one. I Can Make a Promise was probably the best book that I read in October, and it's a middle grade book that completely surprised me. I know you're thinking like, why do you read these middle grade books? This one made me sob, and I was so shocked. It's actually about a Native American girl whose mother was adopted. She wants to find out more about her grandmother and her grandfather and anything about her life. So she's trying to research such things. Plus she has issues with friends and she's doing a project. So the whole thing is about trying to find herself. But in doing so, I found out things about natives over the past 40 years that I had never heard about. And I was really upset that that's what made me cry. This is actually a very well researched and written book, even though it's completely fiction, but it's based off of some of the things that people who are First Nations, Indigenous peoples have gone through in the US and in Canada in the past generation or two. I highly recommend reading this. If you have kids that are like preteens especially and they want to learn more about culture, this is a great book. Unmasked, My Life Solving America's Cold Cases. Paul Holes is a man who helped capture the Golden State Killer. That was a cold case for a long time. He used new technology in order to do that. So Paul Holes, I listened to a lot of podcasts that he's in or is a host of. So I wanted to read more about what his life was like growing up and what maybe his mindset was in having to capture different people. This is actually a very sad book. I think if anyone were to be in the position that he is for a job, you would have a lot of things that you go through and how you view people. And I feel like it ruined a lot of his relationships. So it was actually hard for me to read this because I felt so sorry for his wives that he's had and his kids. But it was well told. It was just sad. This book is set in the 1920s, 1930s time period in what was called like Malaya, but it's now Malaysia. What is great about this is it's got a murder case, so you've got like a trying to figure out and solve the mystery, but it's also got a fantasy base to it where there is this story and a tale about this tiger that goes around just clawing people to death. This one girl here, she's trying to find out a mystery about a man, but it's also got a romance tale in it. So this book has everything. I've been wanting to read this for a while, so I was really happy. I love to read books about different Asian cultures especially. So this was like up there in my to read list and I was like, I'm finally gonna read it. It was really good. Because it was October, I read a lot of like mystery type of stories. I decided to start this series. So this is The Body in the Garden. It's the Lily Adler mystery series. There are 4 books. I read all 4. Body in the Garden was really good. You have Lily Adler. She's a widow. She's been widowed about 3 years. She has a friend of her husband's that she's close to that is a commander. They kind of solve mysteries together, the two of them. She overhears something and then she hears a gunshot and it's in the garden and they find a body. So now she has to try to figure out who did it, who killed this person. I really liked this one. The second book was Silence in the Library. This one was not as good as the first one, but it was still really good. This one had a lot of things that like were surprising that you're like, oh my, that you didn't expect. Death at the Manor. This one had a little bit of those like haunted mansion type of aspect of, was it a ghost that killed someone? So Lily Adler is like, I don't know about that. And she wants to solve the mystery. While Murder at Midnight, this one's pretty fun and this is good for the Christmas season if you want. So in the last book, we didn't have the friend that I really liked in it because she went away. So she was away from the commander. But she meets this one man who's interested in her romantically. So that carries on to this book where they have like a party and there was a murder. And this one they like do something different. It's more like a whodunit where they close people off because someone was murdered at a party. And so she and the commander are trying to figure out who killed this person. Anyway, I had fun reading these books. They were pretty clean. Definitely not for children. I'd say this is good for young adults and older. Sellout. I need to explain briefly. I know this might surprise some people, and other people that have known me a while, they're like, oh, I knew that. I grew up in the punk, emo, hardcore ska scene. Emo actually didn't exist. We didn't really hear that term until probably 2000, 2001. But I started going to shows about 1998 through 2005. So I was in the midst of this period. So this book in particular highlights different bands that became really big and sold out. A lot of the bands I didn't really care for myself. Other bands, it's like, okay, I was there while this was happening, so that was interesting to get that perspective. You have bands, they talk about Blink-182, Green Day, Jimmy Eat World, The Donnas, My Chemical Romance, and several others. And they just give a story about each band's journey to fame, or maybe their fame was short-lived, or maybe not as crazy. Oh, At the Drive-In was also mentioned. That was had a two-parters. I didn't really care too much for this book. It wasn't bad. It was very much what it says it is, just talking about it. It was well researched and well written. So if you like learning about music and bands, I think because I wasn't too into a lot of the bands that were talked about, it wasn't really my thing. I think my husband would have liked this book more than I would. But if you like music, and I love reading music history and learning about music history, that's why I read this. Not the best book that I read. I wanted to read this during this colder season because I have the most memories of going to shows in the colder seasons, even though I went to shows in the summer. Maybe because my love story was built around the cold time period. That could be why. The Masquerade. So this is a Christian historical fiction book. It's set in pretty much the Gilded Age. It's about a young woman. Her father is not doing well in his business. He is in an industrial part that is just not really needed right now. She's trying to get married for her parents' sake so that they could be taken care of, and so she'll be taken care of, and she really doesn't want to have to get married, but she's doing it mainly because her mom wants her to. There's a man who comes around to the vacation area where she goes with her family every year, and it will be her last time there. There's this lighthouse she loves to go to. And so it talks about, different ways of finding love. Now, there's a huge buildup before the main characters even meet, like halfway through the book. And we learn a lot about each character, but I was kind of like, when are they going to meet? Like, come on, just have them meet. But it was a really sweet story, and I enjoyed it. And I've read over a dozen probably of Melanie Dobson's books, so I read it quickly. It took me only a couple days. The Life-Giving Parent. This is also a Christian book. I've read a couple other Sally Clarkson books, but this one was mainly written by her husband. It gives you more of a perspective from a man's point of view of being a father of children that are now grown. I thought it was very good. I have children that are getting older, and I have a very young child, so just to have some reminders is why I wanted to read this. It gives you an understanding, some encouraging words, some things that worked for them that may not work for you. They're just trying to give you some understanding of what it's like to be a parent of successful kids in different forms of however you might see success. For them, their children have been raised in the way that they meant for them to be raised. The Autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. Now, I don't know when this was written, but I feel like this is only half of his story, the first half of his story. I read this because I always feel like, maybe because I always learned about the American Revolutionary War and the people like Benjamin Franklin around that time period, and I live in New Jersey, and part of the war was in New Jersey during that time, and it was cold. So I associate cold weather and like autumn and winter time with the Revolutionary War, and therefore with Benjamin Franklin. I've been to his museums in Philadelphia. I really love his inventions that I've learned about over time or seen in person. Plus, his brother John is mentioned in here, and he is actually one of my great-grandfathers down the line. Benjamin Franklin's my great-uncle, and I know that's really weird, but I actually have a huge family tree and I can pinpoint John Franklin in that line. So I like to learn, I guess, about my relatives. He just interests me. I didn't think it was that great because he kind of talks a lot about himself in a high way. I mean, he's very intelligent, but you could tell he's got a bit of an ego there. But I liked learning about things that I didn't know about.